The little girl gave her sandwich to a homeless woman holding her young child. The next day, the police knocked on her door and revealed a shocking truth. Mia stood in the vacant lot behind the shelter, her sneakers scuffing against the dirt as she watched a group of kids chase an old, half-deflated soccer ball. Their laughter rang out, sharp and bright against the crisp morning air. The lot, with its cracked pavement and scattered patches of dry grass, was their little world, a place where worries were forgotten, if only for a little while. She should have been focused on the game, but her eyes kept drifting toward the far end of the lot. Something was different today. Near the rusted chain-link fence, a woman sat huddled on a weathered park bench, curled around a tiny baby. She was still, too still, her body folding in on itself as if she could disappear into the thin fabric of her jacket. Even from where Mia stood, she could see the way the woman's arms wrapped tightly around the child, protecting, shielding, yet somehow still trembling. A gust of wind swept through the lot, kicking up dust. The woman didn't flinch, but Mia saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way the baby stirred against her chest, its tiny hands peeking out from the folds of a thin, threadbare blanket. The child whimpered, a soft, broken sound, and the woman murmured something Mia couldn't hear. Mia felt her stomach twist. She had seen tired before. She had seen the weight of exhaustion in the way her mother moved after long shifts, the way her fingers ached when she massaged them at night. But this wasn't just tired. This was something else, something deeper. Without thinking, Mia took a step forward. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do, only that she had to do something. She reached into her faded, tattered backpack, her fingers brushing past homework assignments, a broken crayon, and a folded note from her mother, before finally finding what she was looking for, her sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, neatly packed in a Ziploc bag. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and right now, someone else needed it more. As she approached, her small footsteps barely made a sound on the gravel. The woman didn't look up, her head still bowed, her grip on the baby firm but trembling. The baby whimpered again, a weak, hungry sound. 8. Mia hesitated, then swallowed and spoke. Excuse me? The woman's head lifted just slightly. Her eyes were hollow, unfocused, as if she had been pulled from someplace far away. Her lips were chapped, her cheeks drawn. Mia shifted on her feet, then held out the sandwich. "You look hungry," she said softly. The woman blinked, her gaze flicking to the sandwich, then back to Mia. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then finally her voice cracked the silence, soft, barely above a whisper. "I can't take that from you." Mia frowned. "It's okay. I already ate breakfast," she lied, shifting the sandwich a little closer. The woman's lips pressed together, hesitation, shame. Mia recognized it all. She had seen it before, on the faces of mothers at the shelter who refused extra helpings, who always made sure their children ate first. But she also saw something else. Hunger. Real, aching hunger. Without another word, Mia set the sandwich beside her on the bench. "It's yours," she said firmly. The baby stirred again, a small, breathy cry escaping its lips. Mia's gaze dropped to the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby's cheeks were flushed pink from the cold, its fists curling in protest. A thought struck her, and before she could second-guess herself, she reached up and pulled off her knitted hat, the one her mother had given her last Christmas, the one that still smelled faintly of home, of warmth. Carefully, gently, she tucked it over the baby's head. The woman inhaled sharply, her breath catching on something that sounded dangerously close to a sob. For the first time, she looked directly at Mia, really looked, as if seeing her for the first time. Mia offered a small, hesitant smile. The woman's eyes shimmered, her fingers trembling as she reached for the sandwich. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely stronger than the wind curling around them. Mia nodded. She didn't stay. She knew when to let people be. Some kindness wasn't meant to be loud. Some kindness simply needed to be left behind, like a sandwich on a bench or a knitted hat on a baby's head. As she turned to leave, she glanced back once, just in time to see the woman pressing the sandwich to her lips, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. And somehow, Mia knew this moment mattered. That night, Mia told Angela about Olivia and the baby. Sitting cross-legged on the thin mattress, Mia traced circles on the fabric with her fingertip, her voice quiet but insistent. She described the way Olivia had sat on the bench, curled around the baby, barely moving except for the faint rise and fall of her breath. She spoke of the thinness of the blanket, the way the baby's tiny fingers trembled against the cold. Angela, exhausted from work, paused as she unlaced her shoes, her fingers suddenly still. A slow tension settled in her face. "Mia, you can't just talk to strangers. It's not safe." Mia's brow furrowed. "But she wasn't scary," she said quickly. "She looked." She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Lost." Angela exhaled, pressing her temples between her fingers. She knew that kind of lost, the kind that went beyond not knowing where you were, the kind that hollowed you out, leaving nothing but exhaustion behind. Still, she had to be careful. "Baby," she said gently, "I know you wanted to help, but you don't know her. You don't know if she's safe." Mia's small hands curled into her sweater sleeves. "But she was hungry," she whispered. "And the baby. Mama, he didn't even have a hat." Angela let out a slow breath. "You gave them something, didn't you?" Mia hesitated, then nodded. "My sandwich," she admitted. "And my hat." Angela's shoulders slumped. She looked at her daughter, this little girl with a heart too big for the world she was growing up in, and felt something complicated tangle inside her. Pride, worry, love, fear, exhaustion, all at once. For a long moment, she just looked at Mia. Then she reached out, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "You have such a big heart," she murmured. Mia leaned into the touch, but her face remained serious. "Did I do the wrong thing?" Angela swallowed, torn. How could she tell her daughter that kindness wasn't always simple, that sometimes it wasn't enough, that there were people in this world who would take advantage of it? She sighed, running a hand down her tired face. "No, baby. But next time, you come to me first, okay?" Mia nodded, but the movement was slow, uncertain. Angela squeezed her hand. "Promise?" A pause, then a small nod. "Promise." But even as she said it, doubt tugged at Mia's chest. Had she really done enough? Had she walked away too soon? Angela watched her carefully, sensing the unspoken thoughts behind her eyes. After a long moment, she stood, walked to the small dresser, and pulled out an old hoodie. It was a little too big for Mia, but still warm. She turned, holding it out. "If you see her again," Angela said slowly, "give her this." Mia's eyes widened. "Really?" Angela nodded. "But only if I'm with you." Mia took the hoodie carefully, as if it were something more than just fabric, as if it were a promise. Angela exhaled, sinking onto the bed. "All right, go brush your teeth. You've got school tomorrow." Mia hesitated for a moment before getting up, still holding the hoodie against her chest. As she stood at the small sink, watching the water swirl down the drain, her thoughts drifted back to Olivia and the baby. Were they still out there? Were they warm enough? When she crawled into bed beside her mother, those questions pressed against her chest, heavy and unanswered. The next morning, a sharp knock echoed through the small room, jolting Mia awake. The light seeping through the thin curtains told her it was early. Angela, still groggy from sleep, rubbed her eyes before moving toward the door. When she opened it, 2 police officers stood outside, their expressions calm but serious. Angela's body tensed. Cops didn't come knocking at shelters unless something was wrong. One of the officers, a woman with kind eyes, glanced down at Mia before speaking. "We need to ask your daughter a few questions," she said gently. Angela's gaze hardened. "About what?" The officer exchanged a look with her partner before responding. There was a woman found unconscious in the park early this morning. She was barely breathing. The baby with her was dehydrated but stable, she explained. Witnesses said your daughter was the last person seen with them. Mia sat up straighter on the bed, her heart suddenly racing. She's not in trouble, the second officer, a tall man with salt and pepper hair, assured Angela. We just need to know what she saw. Angela hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside so they could enter. Mia pulled her knees up to her chest, trying to process what she'd just heard. Olivia. Unconscious. The baby sick. The female officer crouched down to Mia's level, her tone soft. Sweetheart, we just need to understand what happened. Do you know this woman? Mia shook her head. I saw her yesterday. The officer nodded encouragingly. Can you tell us what happened? Mia swallowed. She was sitting on the bench behind the shelter. She had the baby with her. He was really little and cold. The male officer jotted something down in a small notebook. Did she say anything to you? Tell you where she came from? Mia frowned, thinking back. She didn't talk much, just when I gave her the sandwich, she whispered, I can't take that from you. Mia's fingers tightened around the hem of her sweater, but she looked so hungry, so I left it for her. Angela placed a steadying hand on Mia's back, rubbing slow circles as she listened. Did she mention anyone else? The officer pressed. Family. A place she used to stay. Mia shook her head. Number. She just looked really sad. The officers exchanged another look. She didn't tell you her last name? The woman asked. No, Mia admitted. I wanted to help. Angela's hand stilled for a moment. Then she sighed. What happens to her now? She's in the hospital, the officer explained. Doctors are treating her, but she was severely malnourished. We're trying to figure out who she is. Mia hesitated, then looked up at the officer. Can I see her? Angela tensed beside her. Mia! The officer shook her head gently. Not yet, sweetheart. Right now we're trying to identify her, make sure she gets the care she needs. But if you remember anything else, anything at all, let us know. Mia chewed her lip. She wished she had more to say. She wished Olivia had told her something, anything that could help. Did she wake up? She asked softly. The officer sighed. Not yet, but we're hoping she will. Mia felt something heavy settle in her chest. The baby was safe, but how alone would he be if Olivia didn't wake up? The thought made her stomach twist. The officers thanked them for their time and left, but the room felt different now, smaller, heavier, as if the air itself had changed. Angela sat beside Mia, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You okay, baby? Mia nodded, but deep down she wasn't sure. She should have done more. She should have stayed. And she couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia's story was far from over. After an extensive investigation, they went to Mia's house and delivered the news. The police finally uncovered Olivia's true identity. Fac Olivia Caldwell, the missing heiress of the Caldwell family, Angela and Mia sat in stunned silence as the officer relayed the details. She disappeared after a car accident, he explained. She suffered a severe head injury, and when emergency responders arrived, there was no sign of her. Mia clutched the fabric of her sweater, her small fingers twisting anxiously. So, she forgot who she was? The officer nodded. Yes, we believe she suffered from amnesia and, without any identification, ended up on the streets. Angela inhaled sharply. She had seen cases like this before, people slipping through the cracks, their pasts erased not by choice, but by cruel twists of fate. She's been homeless this whole time? Angela asked. The officer's face was grim. Yes. We know she must have struggled to survive. Somewhere along the way, she met Jonas, a known drug addict, and their relationship led to the birth of the child. Mia sat up straighter. So the baby is really hers? The officer nodded. Yes. And unfortunately, Jonas passed away from an overdose 3 months ago, leaving Olivia completely alone with the child. Mia's chest tightened at the thought. No wonder Olivia looked so lost. She had no one. Angela exhaled slowly, shaking her head. And no one was looking for her. Oh, they were, the officer corrected. Her family has been searching for her since the day she disappeared. They never stopped. A flicker of something passed through Angela's expression. The pain of losing someone and not knowing if they were dead or alive. The cruel limbo of uncertainty. What happens now? She asked finally. The officer shifted his weight. We've already contacted her family. Her brother, Nathan Caldwell, is on his way. He's been looking for her for 2 years. Mia's mind raced. Nathan Caldwell. The name sounded familiar, even to her. He was the CEO of Caldwell Industries, one of the biggest companies in the country. He'll want to see her, the officer continued. But the problem is, Olivia doesn't remember anything. Right now to her, she's just a woman who's been surviving day by day. Mia frowned. Will she get her memory back? The officer sighed. We don't know. Sometimes memory loss from trauma is temporary. Sometimes it lasts forever. Mia's stomach twisted at the thought. Would Olivia ever remember who she was? Or would she always be lost? Angela stood, rubbing her hands over her arms, as if trying to shake off the weight of everything they'd just learned. Can we see her? The officer hesitated. Right now, the doctors are monitoring her condition, but maybe once her family arrives. Mia didn't hear the rest. Her mind was stuck on Olivia, on the woman who had taken the sandwich with shaking hands, who had clutched her baby as if he were the only thing keeping her grounded. She wasn't just another homeless woman. She had a life before all of this, a family, a name, a home. But now, she had nothing. And Mia couldn't stop wondering if she had stayed a little longer, if she had asked one more question, would Olivia have told her something? Would she have remembered? And more than that, did Olivia even want to remember? When the police informed Nathan that they had found his sister, he immediately rushed to the hospital. Nathan Caldwell strode down the hospital corridor, his pulse thrumming in his ears. The stark white walls, the scent of antiseptic, the distant beeping of machines, all of it blurred together as he followed the officer's lead toward Olivia's room. For 2 years, he had chased every lead, scoured every possible place she could have been, and now, finally, she was here, alive, breathing. But was she still his Olivia? He didn't know. The door opened with a quiet creak, and Nathan stepped inside. The sight of her knocked the air from his lungs. Olivia sat upright in the hospital bed, frail, too thin, but very much alive. Her long dark hair was tangled, her face pale and sunken, but it was her. It was really her. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for a brief, desperate second, Nathan hoped. But there was no recognition in them. No flicker of familiarity. Nothing. The officer beside him cleared his throat. Miss Caldwell, this is your brother, Nathan. He's been looking for you. Nathan took a step closer, his fingers curling into fists at his sides as he forced himself to stay steady. Olivia, he said, his voice hoarse. She blinked, staring at him, her face blank. Nathan hesitated, then pulled a handful of photographs from his jacket pocket, placing them on the small table beside her bed. These are us, he said, his voice breaking slightly as he spread them out. Snapshots of a life she had forgotten. There they were as kids, running through the fields behind their childhood home. Christmas mornings, birthday parties, their parents, and then, a more recent one, Olivia, in a designer dress, laughing at some charity gala, her hand resting lightly on Nathan's arm. She studied the pictures, her fingers hovering over them but never quite touching. Her breath hitched, her lips parting slightly, but still her expression remained distant. Finally, she lifted her gaze to him. And then came the words Nathan had dreaded most. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know you." Nathan staggered back, as if the words had physically struck him. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay composed. This wasn't her fault. He had to remind himself of that. He had spent 2 years searching for his sister. He could spend longer helping her remember. The officer cleared his throat. "Miss Caldwell, do you want to go home with your brother?" Olivia hesitated. She didn't know this man standing in front of her, didn't know this life he claimed was hers. But something inside her ached at the idea of walking away. She wanted to remember. Even if the memories were buried deep, even if she had no idea who she was supposed to be, she wanted to know. Finally, she nodded. "I'll go." Nathan released a breath, his shoulders sagging slightly. It was a start, and a start was all he needed. Weeks later, the Caldwell estate was as grand as it was empty. The halls stretched wide, adorned with chandeliers, marble floors, and portraits of people Olivia didn't recognize. She had lived here once, or so they told her. Nathan had wasted no time in hiring the best specialists to help her recover. Neurosurgeons, psychologists, therapists, all dedicated to one thing: unlocking the memories trapped inside her mind. Some days, it was like staring into fog. Other days, the fog would thin, just slightly, a scent, a sound, a fleeting feeling that didn't quite form into a memory, but felt important nonetheless. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, her breath unsteady, as if she had almost caught something, almost remembered, only for it to slip away again. But then, piece by piece, it began. A familiar song triggered the memory of playing piano in the grand music room. A book on the shelf made her remember afternoons curled up reading. And one evening, as she wandered the halls aimlessly, she passed by the portrait of her parents and felt a sharp, aching pull in her chest. Her mother's soft hands brushing her hair, her father's deep, reassuring voice. She pressed a hand to her head, the pressure in her skull unbearable. She gasped as something flickered a memory, but not just any memory. Nathan, not the man standing before her now, a stranger desperately trying to bring her back, but her big brother, the one who used to sneak her extra dessert when their parents weren't looking, the one who used to chase the monsters from under her bed when she was little, the one who had always been there. A sharp inhale rushed through her lungs as she stumbled back, clutching the edge of the table beside her. Nathan's voice was behind her, concerned. "Olivia?" She turned to him, her eyes wide, her breath unsteady. "I remember," she whispered. And for the first time in 2 years, Nathan saw his sister looking back at him. The first person Olivia wanted to see, after regaining her memory, was Mia. Long after the doctors confirmed her progress, long after she had started recognizing her own reflection in the mirror again, it was Mia's face that stayed with her the most. The little girl with kind eyes and a heart too big for the world. The one who had seen a stranger on a park bench homeless, cold and lost, and had still offered her warmth, food, and kindness with no hesitation. For 2 years, Olivia had been invisible. People passed her by, avoiding her gaze, pretending she didn't exist. But Mia had seen her. Olivia and Nathan arrived at the shelter late in the afternoon, just as the sun began to sink behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the lot. The place was small, old, but clean. Olivia could still remember the ache of exhaustion in her bones as she sat behind this very building, clutching her son, too weak to hope for anything more than making it through another night. And then came Mia. Angela opened the door cautiously, her brows drawing together when she saw the 2 well-dressed strangers standing in the doorway. And Olivia would never forget that. "Mama!" Mia's voice piped up behind her. She peeked out from behind her mother's leg, her expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. Her eyes locked on Olivia, widening slightly. She looked different now. Her hair was brushed, her frame no longer hidden beneath layers of worn, oversized clothing. But still, Mia knew. The woman she had helped, the woman she had worried about. Mia took a tentative step forward. "Miss Olivia?" Olivia felt her throat tighten. She didn't expect this moment to feel so heavy, but it did. She knelt down so she was eye level with Mia. "You remember me," Olivia said softly. Mia nodded. "Are you okay now?" Olivia exhaled a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside her for 2 years. "I am," she whispered. Because of you. Angela placed a protective hand on Mia's shoulder. Why are you here? Her voice wasn't unfriendly, but it carried the weight of a mother's caution. Olivia stood, exchanging a glance with Nathan before turning back to Angela. Because we owe you both more than we can ever repay, Nathan said, his voice steady. Angela frowned slightly, crossing her arms. You don't owe us anything. But we do, Olivia insisted. Because when I had nothing, your daughter gave me something priceless kindness, and I want to do something for her in return. Nathan stepped forward, clearing his throat. We'd like to offer you both a fresh start, a new home, a new job. He turned to Angela. Something stable, so you don't have to work yourself to exhaustion just to get by. Angela stiffened. That's very generous, but we're doing fine. Are you? Olivia asked gently. She didn't say it as a challenge, only as someone who understood what it was like to survive instead of live. Angela hesitated, her grip on Mia tightening slightly. Nathan softened his tone. We're not trying to take anything from you, Angela. We just want to give you something in return for what you've given us. A chance for Mia to go to a good school, to have a future where she doesn't have to struggle. Angela exhaled slowly. And what exactly are you offering? Nathan smiled slightly. A job. At Caldwell Industries. Something with good pay, flexible hours and benefits. Angela blinked, clearly caught off guard. That's a lot. And a home, Olivia added, in New York, where Mia can have opportunities she deserves. Mia's head snapped up at that, eyes wide. New York? Olivia nodded. Mia turned to her mother, practically buzzing with excitement, but Angela didn't answer right away. She looked between Olivia and Nathan, hesitation written all over her face. This was a life-changing decision, uprooting everything, starting over, trusting people she barely knew. But as she looked down at Mia, her bright-eyed, kind-hearted little girl who deserved more than just getting by, she knew the answer had been forming long before she spoke it aloud. Angela nodded, slowly at first, then with more certainty. Okay, she said, her voice thick with emotion. We'll go. Mia let out a squeal of joy, throwing her arms around her mother's waist. Olivia exhaled in relief, and Nathan gave a small, satisfied nod. A new beginning. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Olivia felt like she had a family again. Mia stood frozen in front of the grand estate, her wide eyes taking in the towering pillars, the sprawling windows, and the way the evening sun reflected off the glass, making the entire place glow like something out of a storybook. She clutched her mother's hand tightly, torn between excitement and something that felt an awful lot like fear. She had never seen a house this big before, let alone imagined living in one. It felt impossibly large, as if she might get lost in its hallways and never find her way back. Angela, standing beside her, exhaled slowly. It's beautiful, she murmured. Olivia smiled warmly. It's home. She crouched to Mia's level, her expression gentle, open. And now it's your home too. Mia hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Olivia's kindness made the transition easier, but a small part of her still wasn't sure she belonged here. Come inside, Olivia said, standing again. I'll show you your rooms. At her cue, the grand wooden doors swept open, revealing a foyer so large Mia was sure it could fit the entire shelter inside. A grand chandelier hung overhead, shimmering under the soft golden lights. The marble floors were so polished, Mia could see her own reflection staring back at her. A tall man dressed in a crisp black suit stepped forward and inclined his head respectfully. Miss Caldwell, he greeted. Shall I escort our guests to their rooms? Olivia nodded. Yes, please, Henry. She glanced at Angela and Mia. I want you to be comfortable here. Angela nodded stiffly, still a little overwhelmed by the entire situation. Mia, however, had stopped paying attention, too distracted by everything around her. This place is huge, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Olivia chuckled. You'll get used to it. Henry led them down a long corridor, past large paintings, rooms bigger than anything Mia had ever known, and windows that overlooked a garden so perfectly kept It looked like something out of a movie. Their rooms were side by side, cozy, despite the elegance of the house. Mia's was painted in soft colors, decorated with books, a small art desk, and an oversized bed that felt far too fancy for someone like her. Angela's room was just as elegant, but practical. Olivia had insisted she deserved comfort after everything she had been through. "Dinner is in an hour," Olivia said with a smile, before stepping away, giving them space to settle in. Mia stood in the middle of her room, staring at everything, feeling like an outsider looking in. Did she really belong here? By the time dinner arrived, Mia had shaken off some of her nerves, though she still felt a little too small for the grand dining table that stretched before her. The food was unlike anything she had ever had before, perfectly plated, steaming, rich with flavors she couldn't quite name. But even more than the food, it was the conversation that surprised her. Angela and Olivia talked. At first, the words were polite, formal, two women feeling each other out, still uncertain about what this new arrangement truly meant. But as the evening stretched on, the conversation shifted. Angela spoke about Mia's father, how she had loved him, how she had fought for him, how she had given up everything to try to save him, only to lose him in the end. Her voice didn't break, but Olivia could hear the pain in it, the heavy weight of grief and survival. "I had no choice," Angela admitted. "I sold everything we had for treatments, and when he was gone, I had nothing left. Just Mia." Mia, sitting beside her, lowered her head, feeling the familiar ache of missing her father. Olivia's eyes softened. "I think I understand now," she murmured. She had been alone too, not in the same way, but in a way that mattered. She had lost everything, her family, her identity, her sense of self, and she had fought, just like Angela, to keep going. The similarities between them became undeniable. Two mothers, both surviving in their own way. The tension between them eased, replaced with something warmer. By the end of the night, they were laughing over little things, stories of Mia's mischief, memories of simpler times, tales of hope and heartbreak. Somewhere in between, they became friends. Days passed, then weeks. Mia adjusted slowly to life in the Caldwell estate. She started school, a real school, the kind with art classes, music rooms, and libraries that stretched wall to wall. She picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years, rediscovering a love for drawing that had once been buried under the weight of simply trying to survive. Angela, true to her nature, worked hard at her new job, proving herself quickly. And Olivia. She watched them both with a quiet kind of joy, because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving either. She was living. And when the day finally came that she and Nathan asked Angela if Mia could become part of their family forever, Olivia knew she had found something more than just a home. She had found a family. The day had started like any other. Mia sat in her classroom, carefully sketching in the margins of her notebook as the teacher explained the math lesson. The numbers blurred slightly in front of her, but she ignored it. She had been feeling tired lately, more than usual. Maybe it was just adjusting to her new life, her new school, her new world. She shifted in her seat, suddenly feeling lightheaded. The room tilted, voices becoming distant. And then, everything went black. Angela had been cleaning up after dinner when her phone rang. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was a telemarketer. Then it rang again, and again. The moment she answered and heard the frantic voice of Mia's teacher, her knees buckled. "Your daughter collapsed in class. She's being taken to the hospital now." Angela barely remembered grabbing her coat, barely registered Olivia's voice calling after her as she stumbled toward the door. She had to get to Mia. By the time she reached the hospital, her entire world had already started crumbling. The doctor's words felt distant, as if they were coming from underwater. A rare genetic disorder, inherited from her father, a survival rate of only 5%. Angela clutched the edge of the hospital bed, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. Her little girl. Her Mia. "She's just a kid," she whispered, her voice breaking. She's just a little girl." The doctor's face was calm, too calm, as he explained the options. There weren't many. A risky surgery, a slim chance, a gamble with fate itself. Angela collapsed into the chair beside Mia's bed, her hands trembling. She had lost so much already. She couldn't lose Mia too. For the next several days, Angela did the only thing she could do. She prayed. She spent hours in the small chapel down the street from the hospital, kneeling until her legs went numb, whispering the same plea over and over. "Please, let her live. Please don't take her from me." Olivia, watching Angela fade beneath the weight of her grief, knew she couldn't just stand by. "She saved my life," she told Nathan, her voice firm. "Now, I'm going to save hers." With every resource she had, Olivia mobilized a team of the best doctors in the country. No stone was left unturned. Every cutting-edge treatment, every surgical specialist, every expert in genetic disorders, she contacted them all. Even Nathan, usually so controlled, paced restlessly through the halls of the estate, making calls, calling in favors. The household staff, who had come to love the little girl, who had brought warmth and laughter back into their quiet home, prayed alongside Angela. Even the normally stoic butler, Henry, left a candle burning in the chapel. Everyone was waiting for a miracle. The day of the surgery arrived, and the hospital waiting room was a place of silent, crushing fear. No one spoke, no one moved. Every breath felt too loud, too fragile, as if the wrong sound might shatter the delicate thread of hope they were clinging to. Angela sat with her hands clasped so tightly they had turned white. Olivia sat beside her, her grip steady but just as desperate. Nathan stood by the window, staring at the horizon, as if waiting for the sun to bring an answer. Hours passed, each one an eternity. Then finally, the doctor emerged. Angela stood so fast that the chair scraped loudly against the tile. Her heart was a drumbeat in her ears, her body tensed for the worst. The doctor smiled. "It was a success," he said. "She made it through." For a moment, no one moved. Then Angela broke, sobs tearing from her chest as she buried her face in her hands. Olivia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, turning to Nathan, who ran a hand over his face, trying to mask his own emotions. The impossible had happened. Mia had survived. A miracle. When Mia finally woke up, the hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of machines. Angela was already there, her eyes red from crying but filled with relief, overwhelming and raw. Mia blinked, taking in the faces around her. Olivia, Nathan, even Henry, standing near the door. They were all here. She opened her mouth, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Did I miss dinner?" For a second, no one reacted. Then the room erupted with laughter, real, relieved, exhausted laughter. Angela clutched her daughter's hand, tears falling freely, but this time they were tears of joy, not despair. Olivia wiped at her own eyes, shaking her head. "You scared us, kid," she said. "Never do that again." Mia smiled, weak but genuine. "I'll try," she whispered. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight that had been pressing down on all of them finally lifted. Mia was still here. She had fought her way back, and no matter what came next, they would face it together. Nathan Caldwell had always been a man of logic, control, and discipline. For 37 years, his world had revolved around numbers, contracts, and boardrooms. He had built a business empire, managed a fortune, and led thousands of employees, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten what it meant to truly feel. Then Olivia disappeared. For 2 years, his focus had narrowed to one thing: finding her. It had become his sole purpose, his relentless mission. And when he finally found her, when she was home and safe, something shifted inside him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to breathe. And that was when he noticed Angela. It wasn't sudden, nor was it something he could explain easily. It was in the small moments, the way she sat by Mia's bedside night after night, her fingers always gently brushing her daughter's forehead, as if ensuring she was still there. It was in the way she never asked for anything, even when she was exhausted, even when the weight of the world seemed to rest solely on her shoulders. It was in the way she held herself together, not just for Mia, but for Olivia, for him, for everyone. She was resilient, fierce, selfless, and it terrified him how much he noticed. Nathan wasn't used to feeling this way. Angela wasn't like the women he had dated in the past, socialites, executives, polished and distant. Angela was real. She had lived through pain, through struggles that most people in his world couldn't even begin to understand. And yet, she never once let bitterness take hold of her. She simply kept moving forward. Nathan respected that about her, but more than that, he admired it, and maybe, just maybe, he wanted to be a part of it. Life inside the Caldwell estate had changed. It was no longer just a cold mansion of wealth and status. It was a home. Mia, once a child without a place in the world, now had a family who adored her. She spent her days drawing, painting, laughing, living a life she never thought possible. Olivia had found her purpose again, not just as an heiress, but as someone who could use her influence to help others. Angela, after years of struggling alone, now had stability, security. She had people who cared about her, people who wanted her to stay. And Nathan had something he had never truly had before: a family. One evening, long after Mia had fallen asleep, Nathan found Angela standing in the garden, arms crossed as she gazed up at the stars. He hesitated before stepping forward. "You should get some rest," he said quietly. Angela turned, offering him a tired but genuine smile. "I could say the same to you." He exhaled a soft chuckle. "Touché." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. After a moment, Nathan cleared his throat. "Mia's doing well." Angela nodded. "She is. Better than I ever dared to hope for." Nathan hesitated, then asked, "And you?" Angela blinked at him, surprised. "What about me?" "How are you?" he clarified, softer this time. "After everything." Angela looked away, her expression thoughtful. "I'm adjusting," she admitted. "For so long I never let myself think too far ahead. I was always in survival mode, just making it through the day. But now, I don't know. It feels different, like I can finally breathe again." Nathan studied her carefully, taking in the way the moonlight caught the edges of her face, the way her voice held a tender honesty that made his chest tighten. "I'm glad," he said finally. Angela glanced at him then, something unspoken passing between them, a quiet understanding, a shared moment neither of them was quite ready to name. Not yet, but maybe soon. Maybe this was just the beginning. Mia's journey from a child without a home to a daughter of a family who loved her fiercely was more than just luck. It was a testament to the power of kindness, to the way one small act could change the course of a life forever. She had once given a woman on a park bench a sandwich and a knitted hat, and in return she had gained a future, a family, a home. But the story wasn't over yet, because love in all its forms had a way of finding the people who needed it most. And maybe, just maybe, Nathan Caldwell was about to learn that for himself. To be continued. If you want to see what happens next between Nathan and Angela, stay tuned for part 2.